For the longest time, the favourite go-to option for families who needed a car that was a little bit bigger to transport people and goods was the humble estate.
But now, everyone seems to be getting one of these, an SUV. The question is, why? Well, we've got one of each, so we thought we'd try and get to the bottom of it. Estate first, I think.
So when I was a kid, and what seems like the longest time before it, estate cars or station wagons or shooting brakes, whatever you want to call them, were that go-to for large families. Like, that was the thing, right?
Yeah, my parents had a Peugeot estate, which was terrible and didn't last very long. Then we had a Volvo 240.
It was just a saloon car or a sedan with more boot space. So all that was added was that extra boot space.
Do you know where they came from originally?
No.
So estates were, well, station wagons literally were station wagons. They were for taking all the luggage and stuff, so all the multiple cases, etc., from the estate to a station, because in an age where train travel was actually sort of much more the ubiquitous form of long distance travel rather than the car or the aeroplane, that sort of thing. So yes, that's where it came from. They were originally commercial vehicles.
Is that where the tradition of wood panelling on the side of station wagons come from? That they were more of a...
Yeah, I think so. So the woodies, as they were called, weren't they?
Yeah.
Sort of, I think.
Where did that go? Why did it seem to hang on for the longest time in the US?
I can't imagine. It's we've still got a little bit of wood in here, haven't we? So,
is that real wood?
I don't know.
This is the V90 cross country, obviously. I absolutely love this car. We drove it last year on snow and ice in Sweden, and I realised how long it had been since I'd been in an estate car. And there's just something about it, that longer shape rather than the uprightness of an SUV. You get all the practicality of the larger boot, but...
Yeah, I suppose it's simplicity, isn't it, really? It does look more elegant. And again, the sort of the shooting brake there's a bit of a renaissance for those at the moment. Every time somebody shows one like that Zagato shooting brake that Aston Martin did recently, everyone goes, I love a shooting brake, and it just seems to be there's something. They look fast, don't they? It was sort of I'll never forget the 850 touring car, Rickard Rydell in that, and it looked cool. It shouldn't work. You think, well, it's meant to be practical, but somehow it still looked fast.
Volvo, of course, were arguably best known for their estate cars, but they were pretty much every major manufacturer offered one at any given time. Why were they so popular though? What, as a body shape?
I think it is that blend of practicality and being able to go fast, and perhaps it's a lifestyle thing. Perhaps it shows that you've got an interesting life. If you need that extra room to haul stuff around, then perhaps that's saying something about you. Perhaps it's some sort of weird psychological thing for virility that I've got a big estate, therefore I must have lots of children, even if you haven't. I don't know. Perhaps it's something subconscious with that.
So where it used to be a long bonnet as a replacement for a sign of virility.
Well, perhaps it goes from one to the other. Perhaps the young man starts out with a sports car with the sort of the long bonnet for virility, and then in later there must come a switchover point whereby fine, I have a family, I need to show I've got a big family. I've used my long bonnet in order to get my large estate. We should probably talk about this car though specifically, because it is really cool, isn't it? Would you go for the cross-country version that this is, or would you go for a...
Yeah, so we passed a regular V90 on the drive up, and it was the first time in a long time I'd seen both of them next to each other, and I got used to the slightly more ruggedness, the flared wheel arches, the kind of the plastic trim around the wheels, the higher ride height, the just more ruggedness of this car. And then when you see it in the normal trip, you realise that the design, it kind of fits in a bit more with it. It looks sleeker. Yeah. And that sharpness of those lines coming back to the taillights works just that little bit better.
It's more elegant, isn't it? You don't think of an estate car being elegant, but it is, and this is a particularly good design. It's really sharp, isn't it?
Coming back to the idea of estate cars and their popularity, in the US, estate cars were huge. You look at any kind of family sitcoms from the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, and you'll see these cars peppered throughout popular culture. In the US market is now where we find far fewer estate cars than we do in Europe. So all of the great Audi estate cars, you just can't get them over there.
Do you think that's because of a rise not just of the SUV, but sort of probably more personally things like the F-150 and things like that. That actually sort of, it's just everything has grown and grown and grown, and has reached a point where
that
actually, if you want to lug stuff around, why not lug a whole load of stuff around in a massive great pickup?
So you could well be right that inability for the estate car to grow with a desire for bigger cars, and also it can't get smaller. So it's a very kind of fixed platforms. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's because the estate car used that exact bit in the middle that is falling out of favour. People either want smaller cars or much, much bigger.
Yeah.
Well, seeing as the trend has gone towards SUVs, and we just so happen to have one parked up,
I think we should go and have a go on that, don't you?
yeah, let's go and swing into one of them. So, SUVs. Why did they take over from the States as the go-to for people who needed the bit extra room? But do you think it's a prestige thing? Because you think of all the series Land Rovers and the utilitarian four-wheel drive cars that were being produced until the mid-70s, and you get the Range Rover, which is a kind of a luxury, almost lifestyle before there was such a thing as lifestyle incarnation of that same bundle. And then, but that was made for the wealthy, for the elite, for the royals.
Yes.
And then you start thinking, well, that's maybe a bit more aspirational. That's
Absolutely.
something that I kind of want to get into.
We like things that feel different and special, and give us a different viewpoint. And I think that's certainly something to do with it. It could just be that we're nosy.
Yeah.
And it gives you the ability to look over hedges and walls that you couldn't otherwise see over, and therefore we're an intrinsically curious species.
Or it could also be the opposite, because if you're higher, it's harder for people to look in, and maybe it just provides you the opportunity to drive without trousers on. They're like diver's watches. Like, how many people do you know that own a diver's watch, and how many of those people actually take their watch to 200 meter depths? How many people do you know who have an SUV and never take it off-road, or really anywhere muddy? Yeah,
this obviously can do everything you'd want, pretty much, in terms of going off-road and having proper capabilities, but so many of them are just front-wheel drive, aren't they?
So you're paying for something you're not getting, far less so than you would necessarily with an estate. This has been over-engineered for how it's going to be used.
But then how many people actually use the full capability of, say, an iPhone? People like having the latest one. They like having the iPhone 10, for example. But how many people actually use the full capability of it? Is it just a case of we want more capability? We like the idea that, in an apocalypse, we could drive across the nearest field.
This is true.
Here's a question.
Yeah.
Which do you think is easier to drive, an SUV or an estate?
I think in my mind, when I look at the wheelbase of an estate as I get in, that sits in my head. Like, I've got a really long car here, so the idea of getting it through narrow streets in London or parallel parking it is a bit harder. Actually, when you put it next to an SUV, it's not that much longer. It's just because it isn't as tall, it doesn't seem as long. Probably by that, the SUV in my mind feels easier to drive. Also because you're higher up, it's got that better viewing position.
I wonder if that's what a lot of people, when they get into it and drive an SUV, that more elevated position, the ability to sort of look through a corner more, if that's what people do when they drive, is possibly something that people like.
That's it now. Everyone's going to want an SUV forever.
How much of this do we think is simply and purely down to fashion? At one point people wore bell-bottom jeans, now people wear skinny jeans.
But does that mean that, much like the clothes in my cupboard, eventually estate cars will come back?
Quite possibly.
How about the clothes in my cupboard?
No, they're never going to come back.
You have the choice of two. Both keys are on offer. Which one would you prefer to take home this afternoon?
I would take the Volvo, purely because the way something drives is really important to me. And I actually like the increased travel that you get in something like this. The fact that the centre of gravity is so much lower in the Volvo, and you can feel it. And dynamically, there is no denying that the Volvo is better. This is actually very good, but yeah, I think I'd go for the Volvo.
at least while there still are estate cars, I think I have to agree that one would probably have my vote today. So, in the most boring way of summing it up possible, estates great, SUVs also great. It depends on your fashion flavor and taste of the week, but generally it's whatever you prefer to go for. Both do the same kind of job perfectly.
They do.
Well, revelatory it is not, but truth has been spoken.